Barry, how goes?
Oh, pretty good. How are you? Did you get some sleep last night?
I did, although I got two trips of furniture moved yesterday, and I have one more trip to do, plus a birthday party for my puppies, plus a Zoom session with my parents, plus I already did a Zoom session with my brothers. So not sure I'm going to be very focused. I actually have a good, in my opinion, list of prepared topics that I wanted to cover today.
Okay.
But I might actually get to most of that next week. So I wanted to get your sense, Barry. How did it go yesterday? And if I don't actually present those topics today, are you still comfortable driving the discussion today?
Well, I mean, we just winged it. It was a low grade, just kind of a BSing conversation yesterday. That was fine. I mean,
What topics were touched upon yesterday?
well, Heiner, who just connected, told us about his planned presentations. Um, and then I talked a little bit to the new guy, Diggy Vijay, who told us that he was a quantum chemist, which is a discipline that I had not heard of before, but we chatted a little bit about it, and I now understand what a quantum chemist does. And I don't know, I'm not sure I can remember anything else. Oh yeah, Stacy talked about shame and belonging. So we had a little short conversation about shame and belonging. I know, do you remember anything else that I'm overlooking that we talked about yesterday? We're not hearing you. You're muted.
I don't think he's speaking.
Well, he's looking for the, there he goes.
Okay, it's always different devices. Well, I think it started with all Josh looking into the transmission of our knowledge to the next generations. And then we came to the attitudes, and then we came to grief and compassion. And actually, I found this guy from India very interesting. And I'm this time not sitting in my Sarajevo, but in a very nice place. You see here, here's a Buddha, and here's a very nice place. And they're doing some music presently. But I thought before I go for the concert, I want to at least check in.
So
By the way, Sam, you would appreciate Diggy Vijay because his work involves a lot of very sophisticated advanced mathematics, because if you think about how you use Schrodinger's wave equation to map out the orbitals, say, in a helium atom, which are sort of the first ones that they were able to map out with that calculation, he looks at how the electrons arrange themselves in arbitrary molecules, arbitrary bonds, which are very, very difficult, and how challenging it is to use the mathematics of QM to map out the shapes of orbitals in complex molecules. And he's only 26 years old.
So what kind of results are coming out of that field?
Well, they're looking at, not only are they mapping out these molecular orbital shapes, but looking at applications, because there are some known applications from nature. For example, it is believed that photosynthesis, chlorophyll in leaves, involves some quantum mechanical elements of the model, and that's being studied. And also how animals detect the Earth's magnetic field for migration, and birds, they also think that there's some quantum mechanical elements in those models. So some of the applications have to do with potential things like artificial photosynthesis or other things that nature has already figured out, but we're still mystified about.
Yeah, it's puzzling to me how that might explain some of the navigation that birds use. I mean, I even heard the last couple of days that that extra sense is how dogs find a position aligned with north-south in order to actually find the optimal location to poop in.
Oh yeah, the feng shui of dog pooping.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would think that the direction of the wind might be more important than the magnetic field, but who knows? You know, you can, if you're sailing and you want to find the direction of the wind, you just move your head until you get an equal of shh on both ears, and that's the direction of the wind. That's a classical thing. I've even done that sailing. I say, which way is the wind blowing? And I'll do that and go,
Can't
you know,
you
there's
just
the
hold up
balance
a
point.
ribbon?
You can, but it's faster just to move your head and use your ears. It's real quick.
Okay.
That's the apparent wind, by the way.
Anybody else want to check in? I'm going to go to a few of my posts here. Hang on one second. So I'll do a quick check-in. As I said, I was moving furniture yesterday.
For your daughter?
Well, because I'm traveling so much, yeah, I'm partially because of my daughter, partially because of my girlfriend. Because I'm traveling so much, if I were to always put my dogs in a kennel and always find someone to come and look at the cats and always find someone to go take after the ducks, I'd be paying a lot of services. So it turns out that right now my girlfriend's been doing that. So I'm gone Monday through Friday. And it's kind of been close to 2, if not 3 months that I've been out of town. I think I figured out that since June 20th or 21st, I've only spent 1 entire week here at home once since then.
Wow. Wow.
So I've really been traveling, and I still have to travel this way for the rest of September, all the way up to October 11th. And then I have to be in Las Vegas for a conference. And then after that, I'm going to go to Tampa, Florida for a week. And then sometime in November, I'm going to go to Pune, India for about 4 weeks. So that travel is not going to lighten up anytime soon. So my girlfriend and I have an agreement now. She's going to actually move in and sort of not pay the extra rent in her apartment that's about 32 miles away. So hopefully that does some optimization, and hopefully the rest of that can work out. And she really likes it out here. She really likes the dogs, the cats, the ducks, you know, collecting duck eggs, the birds. She does a lot of bird watching. She had almost decided to be an ornithologist. So she just likes the birds. In fact, even the bats. We have bats, which she's found quite entertaining, and some owls. Plus, if she's more present here, then we may actually lose fewer ducks. Since I moved in and since I've not been here very much, I went from 19 ducks down to about 11 ducks because coyotes have been coming and picking off the females. So just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we allowed 4 ducklings to hatch, and they're growing like crazy. It's amazing how fast ducks grow. So we're back up to about 15, I think. So anyway, I'm still traveling a lot, and so therefore moving furniture for both my daughter and my girlfriend, because now my girlfriend's got a couch/sofa that I don't have space for, so offered it to my daughter, and she wants it, so got to do a couple of trips just for that one item. It's gonna be a bunch of gas money. Anyway, it's a chance to see my daughter again also. Anyway, so that's a quick check-in. I wanted to let you know why I'm less prepared these weeks than I would prefer to be. Anyone else? I was going to invite you, Barry, to talk a little bit about Saul cryptography.
Yeah, I mentioned briefly yesterday, and as you know, I posted the 3 obituary articles in your FB group. But I don't know if you were attending when I told the story about him when I was growing up back in Omaha. I don't know if you were. Yeah,
I don't recall.
yeah. He was actually quite famous in high school. Saul Kripke was born in 1940, late in the year. I was born in 45, early in the year. So even though we're 5 years apart grade-wise, really only almost basically 4 years apart age-wise. But he had already graduated from high school by the time I entered the same high school that he had attended. And so I never personally met him. I met he had two younger sisters, and they were closer to my age. So I had met them in high school, but I'd never met Saul, the firstborn. But in reading those three obituaries, there were some stories in the obituaries which I didn't already know. Saul was pretty much autodidactic, which I think I already knew, but I didn't know how autodidactic he was. He was inventing mathematics, long before the topics were, normally taught in school. So he had worked out algebra for himself in fourth grade, pretty much independently and he independently developed some branches of analytical logic, including one that is so obscure that almost nobody's ever heard of it, called modal logic, M-O-D-A-L, which, as I understand it, is a formal mathematics of reasoning by analogy. It formalizes analogical thinking, or something close to that. And I know very well that his father, Rabbi Kripke, who I had taken courses from, was very keen on reasoning by analogy and model-based reasoning. So I'm pretty sure that it's both genetically and culturally inherited, through his parents. His mother also wrote children's books on theology. If you can imagine that you can write children's books on theology, but Dorothy Kripke did that. I also mentioned that there's a character in The Big Bang Theory, the sitcom. There's a character in The Big Bang Theory called Barry Kripke, and the writers created that character and named him after Saul Kripke as kind of an inside joke. But I never really watched the series, so I don't quite understand how the character of Barry Kripke is supposed to remind you of analytical theology, but somehow it's in there. But the story that I think is most intriguing is the Kripkes lived in the Happy Hollow neighborhood of Omaha, which is convenient to Bethel Synagogue, where Rabbi Kripke was the rabbi. And it turns out that just a few blocks away from where the Kripkes lived, Warren Buffett, the investor, also lived. And Warren Buffett's wife had come across Dorothy Kripke's books on theology for children and was fascinated by them and made friends with Dorothy Kripke. And eventually the Buffetts and the Kripkes began to play bridge together every Sunday night. And Buffett, we're talking about the 1950s now, or maybe, 1950s or 60s, I guess. And Warren Buffett kept urging Rabbi Kripke to invest a little bit of money in Buffett's investment firm, which comes to be known as Berkshire Hathaway, but this time it's almost unheard of. And around that time, one of Dorothy Kripke's relatives died and left her about a $50,000 inheritance. And so the Kripkes decided to put this $50,000 inheritance into Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. And 30 or 40 years later, it grew from $50,000 to $25 million. And meantime, Dorothy Kripke herself had died. She died pretty young of cancer, I think. And so Rabbi Kripke put $6 million into the New York Theological Seminary, where he had studied and met his wife. And also, I don't know how much, but so many millions into the local Catholic University in Omaha, Creighton University, to create the Kripke Center for the study of interfaith peacemaking. So there was a Kripke Center at Creighton, endowed by Rabbi and Dorothy Kripke, and there was a new wing of the Jewish Theological Seminary, also endowed by them. And then Saul Kripke became rather famous for his pioneering and path-breaking work in analytic philosophy. But the funny story was, when he was in high school, he wrote a paper, it might have been on modal logic or some technical subject like that, which came to the attention of the academic community. And so Saul Kripke got a letter inviting him to come and teach at Harvard. And Saul Kripke wrote back and says, my mother says I should wait until I finish high school and college before taking a faculty position at Harvard. So he was doing path-breaking work that young. His two books, Naming a Necessity and Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language, were transcribed from extemporaneous lectures that he'd given. He used to give unplanned extemporaneous lectures, and people would record them and transcribe them, and eventually they got edited down into books. But Kripke hardly ever wrote anything down himself, although he did edit the transcripts before they were published as books under his name. So he was quite eccentric. He was sort of your classic nerd in many ways. I really kind of came across him more later in life in 1980, early 1980s. Doug Hofstadter and Dan Dennett wrote a book called The Mind's Eye. And it was about recursion and the real meaning of the pronoun I, the deeper meaning of self-reference. And buried in that book is a footnote referencing Saul Kripke, because it turns out Saul Kripke wrote a rather famous paper among his papers on the meaning of the pronoun I. It's one of those philosophical abstractions. So it was referenced in Hofstadter's writings. And I thought that's interesting, because here I am chasing Hofstadter, trying to understand Hofstadter's insights, and Hofstadter's chasing Saul Kripke. and sort of, borrowing from Kripke's concepts about self-reference and recursion, because it also gets down to Gödel's theorem, because Gödel's theorem is a theorem that essentially uses the pronoun I, referring to the theorem itself. It says, this theorem cannot be derived formally with the logic of mathematics. It's evidently true, and but you can't derive it. So it sort of illustrates the not the irony, but the paradox of self-reference. So it turns out Kripke was working on that too. But the thing that's interesting is that when I went searching for I only found the three that I listed. The New York Times was the first one, and that was a good one. And it referenced an article dating back, I think, to 2006, another interview with him. And there were two other obituaries, and that was it. I'm thinking, here's a guy who does path-breaking work in analytic philosophy and some advanced mathematics, and he's so obscure that hardly anybody's ever heard of him.
I was going to ask that very point. Is that how come we haven't heard his name before and looped it into systemic thinking, critical thinking, model-based reasoning, etc.?
Yeah, and that's the point, is that his work is so obscure. I mean, I knew about his books, Naming a Necessity and Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language. I had never attempted to read them. But then I've never attempted to read Einstein's original writings either. So maybe that doesn't say very much for me. But I knew that these books were sort of notorious or famous in the annals of analytic philosophy. But analytic philosophy is a very narrow branch of philosophy, as is analytic theology, a narrow branch of theology. Everything is by rigorous analytical reasoning. But
that's ironic in and of itself.
Yeah, but I brought him up because I knew his father. I had studied ethics under his father, and I knew of Saul Kripke, but I had never met him because he was 5 years ahead of me in school. But he was legendary. People would follow him around in high school. These are the stories that I learned, that his groupies would follow him around in high school and write down everything he said. And I thought that was kind of both interesting and ironic, because one of the things that is supposedly comes out of Naming a Necessity is an analytical piece of logic that says that nobody understands the word I say. And there it was, people writing down every word he said because they couldn't understand it until they studied it later. They would understand it. So there's this irony of him writing a book that's almost autobiographical. Nobody understands the word I say, but he meant it not about himself, but really about the weakness of spoken language or even written language, that you can write or speak all kinds of things, and good luck if people can actually correctly interpret the meaning. And that was part of naming a necessity, is about whether words have rigorous meanings or they're just simply kind of umbrella suitcase words that kind of talk about a vague area without anything being specific. And the reason he called it naming a necessity is because at least some names point to a specific thing that's rigorously defined, and other words simply point to some vague area of attention and don't have anything pinpointed. Whereas in mathematics, a variable x is supposed to point to something very specific. There's only one thing that x is supposed to point to. That's the solution to your algebraic equation.
In
So
context.
naming this, say?
In context. Context is everything.
Yeah, and so that's the whole point, is that if you don't have the context, then a word can have quite a number of meanings. And poets basically take advantage of that, and politicians take advantage of that. But people are trying to be rigorous, and this is where it sort of gets back to Wittgenstein, is that if you want to communicate, you've got to use symbols that have very precise and agreed upon meaning. Otherwise, you're just juggling vagaries.
Or I would say precise enough.
Yeah. So, and by the way, Kripke's analysis of Wittgenstein was one of those things where it's not clear if Kripke was interpreting Wittgenstein or clarifying Wittgenstein or even defining Wittgenstein, but that book, Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language, was referred to as Kripkenstein. They sort of put the two together and said you can't really distinguish Kripke from Wittgenstein anymore, because Kripkenstein is sort of the definitive definition of Wittgenstein. Anyhow, that stuff is, of interest to analytic philosophers, and I'm technically not one of them, or at least.
So do you know enough, Barry, to know who are the disciples now in analytic philosophy, either of Kripke or of analytic philosophy itself?
Well, there is a center that was founded at New York University called the Kripke Center. And the Kripke Center basically collected all of the materials from Saul Kripke, a lot of which are transcriptions of oral conversations, because he didn't do very much, if any, original writing. He said he couldn't even read his own handwriting, which is, by the way, also true of me. But he did edit transcripts of his tape recorded presentations for publication, and they are still trying to figure out what of his stuff to publish. Most of what he communicated has never been published, even if it's been transcribed. But the Kripke Center at City University of New York has this huge collection of transcriptions of his unpublished work. And here he was, he died at age 81, after having been famous all the way back in high school in the 1950s.
So here I am imagining what would have been had those been video recorded.
Precisely. Well, like they say, there were tape recordings. I don't know if the tape recordings were ever made public, although the two famous books are edited transcriptions from those talks. And one of those links that I published on your page goes into some discussion about these edited transcriptions, because Kripke actually spent a lot of time tinkering the transcriptions, because he wanted to get every word exactly right, because he didn't want to use words that were so imprecise as to be vague. He tried to make all of his edited writing extremely rigid definitions, which is like what you do with your thing about what is the meaning of this word, or at least what do you mean when you use that word. So there's sort of a connection between them.
That's exactly why I wanted to invite you to summarize. And in fact, this phrase, truths in semantics, what does that mean in this Kripke context? What truths did he find in semantics?
Well, the point is that not most words are not what he called rigid designators. That is, they point like, it's a rigid designator that points to this physical object. So like Einstein points to a person, uniquely, whereas if you point to relativity as a school of thought, that's, not just Einstein, that's all the interpretations and subsequent stuff. So he talks about rigid designators, which everybody agrees points to something specific. And then other terms which are less precise, have a fuzzier definition. And the point, I guess the point of all that is that anything that is non-mathematical, that is spoken language, has this phenomenon of being vague to the point where the semantics are not totally precise. And a lot of semantics are intentionally vague, or multiple meanings and so on.
Yeah. So I was very curious about that one particular phrase, and almost by itself, that one phrase has me interested in reading/learning more about this guy.
Well, I would say read those biographies or those obituaries, and there's only, I think, 4 of them that I posted, and you can read them in 15 minutes. So I would say read those, and you would probably learn about as much as I could tell you off the top of my head thing, other than the fact that the only other thing I can tell you is that what I learned directly from his father, Rabbi Kripke, in that course on ethics that he taught to high school students, and only about a dozen of us attended his class on ethics. But I think that by itself is an interesting story that I have some authority to tell, because I was a participant in that.
Okay, because interspersed in your summary of Kripke's thinking, I interjected this one comment. And it says, irony sometimes implies lack of probabilistic understanding. So I think when people try to be binary/absolute with regard to names and meanings, they, in fact, at least to me, reveal a non-probabilistic perspective. They expect things to be precise, when if you actually understand how usage is derived, especially over many years, then you would understand that, hey, there's a mode, or perhaps the 2 modes or multiple modes of meanings to any symbol, and that could lead you to an understanding of what is being said. But if you don't understand that, then you too easily point out contradictions, hypocrisies, misunderstandings, irony, humor. In fact, humor relies a lot on that phenomenon.
Yeah, ambiguity in general, all kinds of ambiguities of meaning.
Right. So I think people who don't even understand a simple bell curve will probably have difficulty with symbols and names and phrases.
Yeah.
And by the way, to me, intelligence is probably 99% recognition, which I associate as a symbol and what hangs off that symbol.
Yeah.
To me, that's recognition. And if you dig deeper into that, that's also interpretation. But if you don't get that, and you expect that one symbol has only one meaning, then you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointments.
Yeah, and where you're setting yourself up for algebra, which most people are not going to be attuned to. I mean, there's a very small demographic who is attuned to algebra and solving systems of equations where there's a unique solution that's correct and all the others are incorrect. That's a pretty rarefied discipline, even though maybe Damien is good in algebra, your average teenager isn't.
And what's more interesting is these incomplete descriptions. If you have 5 variables and only 4 equations, you're going to define a plane, or you're going to find some sort of inequality.
Yeah.
Still has insight.
Diophantine equations, where there is maybe a finite set of solutions, all of which are correct in the sense that they solve the equation, but there's no one they're not unique.
Yeah.
So unique. So what's typically called rigid designator is a unique object that a name points to, as opposed to some set.
By the way, I think that that has implications on your insistence on functions versus rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing
Because
about, go ahead.
some of those variables, as they take values, don't generate, just one possible value, or one value could be the outcome of two distinct kinds of inputs, and so those are not strictly functions.
Yeah, yeah, functions which are multi-value, which are technically not functions. They're called relations, I guess, is the technical term in mathematics. You put in X and you get out multiple f of x's. Yeah, that's. But the thing about rules is a rule is supposed to have a dividing line between this, the if, then, or else. And one of the things that's always been appreciated is that judging whether you're on this side or that side of a rule, that's already problematic. But Poincaré went a step further. He said, no matter how much you deviate, no matter how tiny your deviation around some point, that's enough to change the outcome dramatically. Not just, so that was the point of Ed Lorenz. He says that when the present determines the future, but the approximate present does not approximately determine the future, it dramatically leads to highly differential futures. So the tiniest perturbation, no matter how small, can generate a completely different outcome. Not just a small perturbation from measurement generates a small perturbation from the prediction. And that's really important. I mentioned this yesterday to Diggy about in quantum mechanics, how this is so important in quantum mechanics, because you could posit perfectly deterministic laws for the motion of fundamental particles, but if you do not know the initial position to arbitrary precision, it's useless, because the tiniest perturbation throws you into a distribution of outcomes right away. Not even eventually, just right away.
Is that really true though? Because if you actually do have a infinitesimal change, usually in these systems that are characterized, let's say, inertially, it takes a while for that to become chaos.
We're a while for the motion of an electron in an orbital. We're talking about, I don't know, femtoseconds or zeppos. We're talking about extremely short times, and the problem is, how do you can't even measure the initial phase of a.
Okay, but that's not Newtonian. That's not inertial.
Yeah. So there's two issues. One is that the act of measurement is a disruption. So after you've measured it, it ain't that anymore. And even if you could measure it, the tiniest perturbation rapidly decoheres. That's in quantum computing, the rate of decoherence is so bloody fast that you're lucky to get off a dozen instructions before the decoherence spoils the entanglement, the correlation. So the whole problem in quantum computing is try to minimize the rate of decoherence, which is very fast. And if it isn't, if it's slow, then you're back to old-fashioned computing. In old-fashioned computing, you set something to a 1 or a 0, it stays that way, for an arbitrarily long time. And in quantum computing, it stays that way for nanoseconds. And then it's too late.
So I want to appreciate your reference to Saul Kripke, because I think I'm about to learn something.
Yeah. So he's interesting partly because he's a path-breaking analytical thinker, and also because how obscure he is, given how. And the same is true of Raymond Smullyan. Raymond Smullyan is much more famous because Raymond Smullyan wrote lots of puzzle books, and he was published in Omni magazine. But he was also an analytical thinker, and did work on branches of logic like combinatorial logic, which he wrote a wonderful book on. And he's also obscure. When I mention his name, and I actually met Raymond Smullyan in person. I was responsible for him being invited to give a talk at BBN, because I mentioned my interest in him, and the guy who hired me says, "Oh, I went to school with him. Let me invite him." So I actually got to meet Raymond Smullyan, but these people are obscure to the general population, and their contributions are obscure. People have heard of Gödel, mainly, I think, because if it hadn't been for Doug Hofstadter, I don't think anybody would have heard of Gödel.
Except mathematicians.
Except mathematicians, yeah. But look, here's the thing, Poincaré. Poincaré did pioneering work that laid the groundwork for chaos theory. And he did that in 1880s, around 1890 or so. And he published, a couple of monographs on it in the 1890s. And yet, in the 1920s, when Bohr and Einstein were arguing over quantum mechanics, there's no evidence that they had any familiarity with Poincaré's work from 1890, that the tiniest perturbation, the initial condition, can generate dramatic changes in the outcome. And that's basically why you have to do probability in quantum mechanics, and you can't do. So Einstein was sure that there should be some deterministic laws. But if he had known of Poincaré's work as Edward Lorenz came out, he would have said, well, even if you had deterministic laws, if you don't know the initial conditions, the phase of the oscillation, the tiniest perturbation, no matter how small, you're screwed anyway. And they wouldn't have argued about it for decades. And of course, Lorenz published his work in 1963, which is almost a decade after Einstein died.
Your reference to obscurity is fascinating, because you could also say that some very well-known people have core thoughts and ideas and works which are still obscure.
Absolutely.
In other words, they were not appreciated for what they really were. And obviously my reference here is to Doug Engelbart.
Yep.
Everybody knows him as the inventor of the mouse.
Yep.
None of them know him as a evolver of the coevolution notion between tool systems and human systems.
Yep.
Now, he didn't invent that, but that's where he was primarily concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. This obscurity of precision thinkers. I mean, there's always been precision thinkers.
Now, that's easy to understand, though, right?
Yeah.
Precision thinkers are very, very rarely appreciated by the masses.
Exactly. I mean, here you have this whole series, The Big Bang Theory, which is a sitcom, but you don't learn anything about the actual Big Bang Theory. That's just the name of the show.
Of nerds, basically.
Yeah, it's a mockery of, it's just making fun of people who are very precise, analytical, or mathematical thinkers, but that's not what's interesting about them. It's their quirks. It's their social or poor social graces, that's the quirkiness that people attend. And if you look at if you read the obituary of Saul Kripke, the obituary spends more time on his quirkiness than the technical work, because the technical work is very hard to turn into a narrative.
I wonder how much of that precision thinking and that lack of, let's say, social graces gets one labeled as on the spectrum.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Take a point about Greta Thunberg.
Yep.
Or my dad.
Yep.
Perhaps you.
Perhaps me.
Perhaps I.
Perhaps you. Perhaps Damien.
And people have accused me of being on the spectrum. In fact, my girlfriend thinks I'm on the spectrum.
You probably are, or at least partly. Well, you're probably somewhere on the spectrum. By definition, the spectrum means you're somewhere on it.
Correct. But it usually means you're not, at the zero.
You're not in the middle of the bell curve. You're somewhere on the tails, the 3, 4, 5 sigma on the tails of the bell curve.
Yeah.
And I'm on the tails of the bell curve. Not that far on the tails, but on the tails.
You could say one prefers to be there.
Well, that's how I made my living. I made my living by being sufficiently on the tail of the bell curve that I had a marketable skill that I could earn a living at in a company for which systems thinking was highly valued.
Yeah. I mean, look at, again, Greta. People don't understand her, mock her. Those are the very people who can't get what she's saying because they're not thinking systemically.
Well, most people don't think systemically. They don't even know what it is. Most people, like I said, the guy who took in my retirement account never even heard of the name of my profession. It was novel to him. 40 years of taking in retired people, he'd never heard of a systems thinker before. All right, that tells you that pretty obscure.
By the way, if you think that's true of commercial, business, and industry, I'll have to say there's an underappreciated element of what really went on 20, 30, 40 years ago in government funded research. Because when I was working at TRW, we did have people called systems engineers.
Yep.
And
Sure.
I was, practicing system engineering with them.
Yep. Yep.
And that is not done in industry. When I introduce those methods and techniques and artifacts to commercial industry, people don't understand what that means. So the way I describe it is, hey, if you want to write what a description of, let's say, imagine you're going to specify how the James Webb telescope worked 30 years ago. It didn't exist.
Right.
In fact, the technology that is in that telescope did not exist.
They invented it as they went along. They invented
They needed to invent those things. Okay.
They had to invent the
needed to-
corrections.
So, as a systems engineering approach, one of the very first artifacts you create is something called the operations concept. And I tell people, hey, what that is it's a science fiction book about what the world would look like if we had this thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't work on the James Webb, but I worked on the Hubble, and I worked on the space shuttles before the space shuttles actually went up.
Yeah.
Actually, space shuttle simulators, okay, for training programs. So we had to write operations concepts.
Yep.
What would a day in the life of an astronaut trainee look like if we had these 9 or 11 training simulators? What would be located in Florida? What would be located in Texas? What would be located elsewhere? What would they train in each of these? How high fidelity would each of these subsystems have to be? How much time would be spent there? How much, accuracy would these instruments have to demonstrate before they would be useful for a training purpose? So people are not used to writing this kind of science fiction. But if you don't do that and sort of get the boundary conditions right, then how are you going to go and design one of these things?
If you were to say to somebody, oh, I have a PhD in operations research, how many people would have ever heard of operations research or even have a clue?
Outside mathematics.
Yeah, outside of management science and applied mathematics, most people would say operations research, I don't know what that is.
You call it saving money.
Well,
which usually what is translated to in business.
I mean, I heard operations research for the first time, I think when I was a senior in college, when a professor mentioned it. Didn't define it, but he mentioned it. And so I'd heard of it, but I didn't know what it was because he couldn't elucidate what it was. And then in grad school at Stanford, 6 years later, I was able to take courses in operations research.
And
then I could find out what it was.
Isn't most of it just linear algebra, linear optimization?
Well, it begins with the simplex method. I mean, forgetting the name of the guy who invented the simplex method at Berkeley, you can look it up. He basically launched the field by developing an algorithm for solving linear constrained optimization problems where everything is linear. And I did my PhD in nonlinear optimization. So, and I took courses. The first book on operations research, I think, was written by von Neumann and Morgenstern.
Many decades ago.
Yeah, and then Luce and Rafa wrote the next generation, 10 years later. And I learned about operations research because my apartment mate had Luce and Rafa. He had the book. And I would thumb through that book and I go, this really looks interesting. That's when I was working on my master's. So I didn't really know anything about operational research except thumbing through Luce and Rafa that my apartment mate owned a copy of because he was studying management science. But you had to go out today and ask anybody, have you ever heard of operations research? Can you give me even a crude definition of it? And I'm going to guess that you'd be lucky to find 1% who even heard of it and can tell you something sensible about it.
So looping that idea back to this obscurity idea, either people are hiding because they're afraid that the current regime that controls thought will ban their thinking. And you can think of, Comercus and Bruno, what's his name? And, people who are basically shedding the geocentric view of the
Kepler and Galileo.
Right. So either they're intentionally obscure or they're intellectually obscure because the people who control thought don't understand. If they understand, they're trying to stamp it out. If they don't understand, then they don't even talk about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different forms of obscurity. And I would say Engelbart falls curiously in this latter part. I mean, very smart people understand his technology contributions, but those very same technologists don't give much time to his, I would say now I use the word collaborology, his collaborological interests. They take the mouse, they make $1 billion. You know, they take word processing, they make $1 billion out of it.
Right.
Tens, hundreds of billions. You know, they take Windows and make billions of dollars. They take outline processing, that's barely getting started, by the way. But you know, now that's a hot field. They take oh, actually, here's another thing. The corded key set. That's about, you know, quote unquote a failure for the last 50 years, but I think that's going to come widely used in a few more years. So he is obscure, even though he's very well known.
People will recognize the name, but maybe not be able to. It's a little bit like
Most people don't even recognize the name. Even
it's
people
like
at
if you
computer
name a
science don't recognize
celebrity and you say, "Oh yeah, I remember the celebrity," but I don't remember what pictures or, you know, or so you can remember a name that you've heard, but you still, so that's name recognition is not really knowing what the person represents in terms of their
right.
career.
So talk about symbols. You get the symbol called Doug Engelbart.
Right.
You got this thing hanging off that name called the mouse, invention of the mouse. Okay.
Yeah.
But very little else. And he's actually got quite a bit else hanging off of that name. Okay. And very few people appreciate that, because once they have a one-liner on a guy, that's it. That's what they think the guy is.
Here's a modern one. You say the actress Hedy Lamarr. All the memes you see about Hedy Lamarr is that she invented Wi-Fi. Well, she came up with the mathematics of spread spectrum. I remember hearing spread spectrum, you know, those two words in the 1980s, and I had to go look it up. I had to, spend some time because I could hear the words and know that I don't know what this is, but it sounds like it's meaningful and it has applications. And now they, on Facebook or social media, they attribute it to actress Hedy Lamarr. Like, well, what exactly did she do, and why did she get credit for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth?
Weak signals.
Well, and also frequency hopping. It's really frequency hopping. It's really.
See, ESL, which was a subsidiary of TRW, was founded to do almost exactly that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
ESL, by the way, just as a little point of history that I can allude to now, was the world's preeminent developer of antennas.
Okay.
And they could build antennas from 0 DC all the way up to, you talk about it, VHF, UHF, SLF, whatever, they had GHF. So that expertise meant that it could actually apply that in a lot of different areas. For things that had to go around the Earth's curvature, you had to work within a certain frequency. For things that had to go underwater, you had to do different frequencies. For stuff that you had to bounce off of meteor showers. Okay, believe it or not, that exists, and you had to use different technology there also.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, reading up a little bit on antennas and coming across the word aperture. I knew this word aperture was a very important word that defines some characteristic of an antenna, but it took me, I don't know, probably years to figure out what the word actually meant. All I knew was that it was a relevant term of art in the characteristics of an antenna. But it's hard to define.
And beam forming.
Beam formation. Or antenna gain. I knew antenna gain was another technical term. And you pick up these terms, you know that they're relevant. If you mention them, it sounds like you know something about them. But in fact, you don't know the mathematics. You don't know what it really means, only that it's a relevant characteristic feature that has a name.
We had to look at arrays of antennas.
Yeah.
And actually treat those as a single antenna and actually then tweak
steerable arrays. I spent a lot of time trying to appreciate what the hell is a steerable array, and I eventually got a pretty good idea of what they are and how you use them, and phased array antennas and steerable phased array. But you can drop those terms into a conversation as if you know what you're talking about.
which is what
But
I'm
tell-
doing right now.
Yeah, but if you say, well, explain it to
the
me.
point being, you brought up systems thinking and how rare it is. I'm
Right.
saying in certain government funded projects, that was actually not that rare. It was actually a very well appreciated practice and
It
school of thinking.
was in the
Okay.
Bell system. I mean, systems engineering, they were hiring systems engineers and network planners, and there was a whole division. Systems engineering in Western Electric. So yeah, I mean, but you had a rarefied corporate entity, which was hiring, the top graduates at the top universities.
I'm just curious to find out whether I could see any job listings right now at this very moment for systems engineer.
Oh, there probably are. Places like Rockwell and Boeing and NASA, and I don't know. Sure. Computer companies, I suppose there are systems engineers. I don't think it's that rare anymore.
Well, let's see. HCL, but that's an outsourcing company. Control systems, electrical engineers, mechanical, network.
Same is true of
Engineering
cognitive
managers.
science. Cognitive science was a term you didn't hear until maybe around the 1980s.
Yeah, but see, now I'm seeing systems engineer mentioned only as a auxiliary term. It's not really the primary title.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think its recognition and appreciation has gone down.
Yeah.
It looks like from first glance.
Well,
But
because now you hear
Glassdoor will
terms.
tell me, hey, systems engineers make on average $97,000 a year.
Yeah. So now you hear buzzwords like AI and neural networks. I mean, the buzzwords sort of evolve every decade or so, and then you still don't know what the hell these buzzwords mean because they're emerging fields, frontier fields.
If it's understood, it's not AI.
Yeah. If it's an algorithm, it's not AI, it's just an algorithm.
Although AI pioneers a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go with this? Because first I hit on Kripke, and that led me to semantics and thought, which led to probability theory, which led to systems engineering, which led to these topics we can bounce around on for the last 5 minutes. Where's
Yeah,
this
maybe
leading?
we should shut up and let a few other people check in.
Okay, I'll shut up for a while. Kayla, Josh, DJVJ, welcome.
Hey, what's up?
We've been chatting for an hour about arcane topics that we
Yeah.
have no idea if you or Josh or Kayla are even tuning into us.
Yeah. Barry, do write the name of the book that you mentioned on operations research.
Oh, those 2 books? Yeah, I'll put it in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah.
They're going to be named after the authors. Maybe I can remember the titles too.
But I'm curious, DJVJ, I believe yesterday was your first time. I heard Josh mention
Yeah.
that he invited you.
Yeah.
I was unable to participate yesterday, but what did you take away from yesterday's conversation, if anything?
Well, I came to know about what system engineering is, what is operation research. I came to know about these new terminologies.
No, actually, I'm
And-
talking about yesterday's conversation, not today's. Did we talk about these
No,
things
no,
yesterday?
Yeah, I had a brief introduction about it. Then we were talking about the difference in education system around the globe. We did talked about that, and we bounced around different topics regarding this. And we also talked about quantum research in quantum mechanics. So yeah, this was the whole conversation.
Okay. And what in Josh's invitation was interesting enough that got you to come yesterday and then
Yeah.
got you to come again today?
Yeah, I think is understanding what was my takeaway from yesterday's conversation is that how you guys boil down things to really basic concepts, right? Because now there's so much content available online that I see, which is like very discrete, and it looks good. It looks like gold in chunks, but it's not. It doesn't make sense when you make it a piece of a puzzle in a bigger picture. It's all it all looks like a facade. But
Can you give an example?
when we were talking, yeah, around like most of our most of my education is I've learned a lot of things online. So whenever I was studying this quantum mechanics when I was in my college as well, so whenever I used to learn about something, any subtopic or anything, so whenever I tune into that that topic directly, I always had a partial understanding of that concept, rather than whenever I took a different approach, that's tuning into Stanford or Harvard's lecture series, watching it all from first to the last, and catching up with the assignments that they give, and that thing actually made me more curious and clear in my head about the topics. And I was missing these type of things within my I was within my friend circle, because in my generation, I'm just 26 years old. So what we people generally do is that we hop on from one topic to another without understanding that what we are actually talking about. We just, most of us just want to sound fancy. We pull out these terminologies which are, trending sometimes, and we actually miss what's beneath it, what's actually giving it the strength, or where it's coming from. So I think yesterday I was like very fascinated by listening to the underdog stories of a lot of great personalities. One of them was Saul Kripke. I came to know about him yesterday, and Barry talked about him. So yeah, I think these are the, I think when I had a deep understanding of anything, I actually read about the basics. When you understand the basics quite clearly, you actually become more susceptible to the information or the advances, rather than jumping onto the advances and then reverse engineering stuff. So if it's possible, you took down the bottom to up approach, and that's very fundamental in yesterday's conversation. That was my takeaway.
And it was enough for you to come back today then. That's cool.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, in fact, the way I'm structuring this on Sundays, and I do admit I do have some prescribed guidelines that aren't forcibly enforced, but were suggested because of the random nature of Saturday and other calls, is that we try to really apply rational and systems thinking and model-based reasoning and critical thought, and what Barry calls analytical theology and analytical philosophy, as opposed to just letting things slide and say, oh, that got said, it must be true. So that is precisely what we're trying not to do in this particular forum, which is why when you make a statement, I say, could you please give an example? And that was a lead to giving more detail, drilling through. So why was it not sufficient for you and your friend circle to stay at this more, and I'll use this word, shallow level of understanding? Why is that not sufficient? Why did you feel that you needed more?
Because that model fails when you apply those things in practical grounds. Those models actually fail when you're trying to genuinely trying to teach someone who is younger than you, who trusts you with your information, and you understand that I don't know enough about it. Because if someone is asking me, it means he's putting his trust, time, and his, I would say, credibility on me, and I just can't let that person down as well. So I think that's I would say, reality check that I got. That whatever I know in chunks. It doesn't make sense when I try to make a picture out of it. So that's shallow level of understanding that I had. I'm just bombarded with the fancy terminologies, and this is not enough, I think, and this is not how things should be, should be, I would say, practiced. Yeah.
So may I ask you a personal question, Vijay?
Yes.
Could you, or are you willing to describe what your parents do and how they raised you?
Yeah, my father was in Indian Army. He served in Indian Army for 16 years. Then he took the voluntary retirement, and now he's been a teacher since 16 years. So he's an officer in education department in Punjab government. And my mother is a housewife, and they had raised me pretty well. I had all the opportunities to learn, to study, and access to a lot of things which generally people from my village don't have it. I studied in a good university. I did my graduation from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and then my master's in theoretical chemistry from Central University of Punjab. And yeah, which is like central funded universities, and quality education as well. And then I'm working with my friend on his startup, and he had hired me as his manager on managing. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Doesn't mean anything. It's completely irrelevant to most, but I was in Chandigarh for about 2 days in
Wow.
2018, about 4 years ago.
Wow.
Are
I
your
must have
par-
been I must have been doing my final year of graduation there. And at
All I
that
can
period
say
of time.
is most other places were very hot. That was actually a very mild, pleasant environment.
Yeah, Chandigarh is a beautiful, beautiful place to live in.
are your parents both fluent in English?
Well, my father, not like English that I'm speaking. I think they are pretty fluent in administrative English, which is like far different from like generally how we talk. In
Is-
administrative English, it's like, okay, there are straight phrases, and they're not very fluent actually.
The reason I ask is that try asking your mother if she prefers to be known as a housewife or as a homemaker.
Well, she hardly speaks English, and yeah, actually, this is the
My-
norm. This is the norm.
My
Yeah, I
mother,
get it.
my mother insisted that she's not a housewife, she's a homemaker.
Wow.
That's why I bring it up.
But that has
Yeah.
implications in our culture, right?
Yes.
Jerry? It may not
Yes.
have implications in other cultures.
Yeah, I don't know how they would be translated into Punjabi or other
Yeah.
languages, but
Yeah.
But that again is sort of the scope of words and whether they're superlative or pejorative or neutral or objective or whatever. All I know is that my mother says, "Don't call me a housewife. I'm a homemaker."
So I'm curious how you got your curiosity in going deeper. And I was wondering whether aspects of your dad's career or way of living life or your mom's way of living life, clearly they have influence on you. I was just trying to see if it was more evident.
Yeah. So,
And do you have siblings?
I have a sister. She's a psychologist. She has done her master's in psychology from Punjab University,
Mhm.
and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, this startup that you're now recruited to work at, what is it
Yeah.
trying to do, or is it still in stealth mode?
What?
What is the product or service of this startup, if you could say?
Yeah. Actually, we are trying to make a recurring payment for, based on cryptocurrencies, which is a new fleet because no one has ever done it. So we have made a model which works. So now we're trying to refine it. So I'm not in the engineering team. I'm mostly in the management and graphics designing, because while I was studying theoretical chemistry, I was also learning Adobe Illustrator. So yeah, I had some management skills. I was a dancer as well. So I used to do the side gigs when I was a student. So yeah, that paid off, and they had hired me for this. And side by side, I'm also doing a course in education. That's the primary thing that I'm doing, and I must have something to pay my bills as well. So I took this offer as well. They had signed me for next 2 years. Yeah.
You said your sister is on the faculty of psychology?
No, she's not. She just graduated. She had done her master's in psychology, and she's now
I see.
doing a advanced course in psychology. Yeah, she's a psychologist. Yeah.
Does your sister have reasonable education in mathematics, at least up to calculus?
No, statistics actually. Statistics. They teach. Yeah, statistics.
But not calculus.
Not calculus.
Okay, I was going to suggest that you have her look at something, but if she hasn't had calculus, it may not make any sense.
What?
Well, because I developed a mathematical model relating emotions to learning.
Wow.
Which is a topic which it would be a topic in psychology. But the mathematics kind of dips into elementary calculus. You don't need the calculus, but without it, you won't get the full value of it.
You can still get the takeaway though.
I get it.
Yeah.
The
So I was
abstract
going
would
to
still
say,
be meaningful.
but she may not.
Please
she
do
may-
suggest it, I would say.
Well, I'll give you the link and you can have her look at it and decide whether or not she thinks
Sure,
it's
sure.
relevant. Let me just get the link here real quick.
Also, out of curiosity, how did you and Josh meet?
Well, we met on Clubhouse, and there was a mutual friend of ours named Peter. He's a mathematics professor in New York City College, maybe. Yeah, I think it's been a year since we talked, and I happened to just join in on Clubhouse after quite a while. So he was online, and I just waved at him and said, "How are you doing?" After we talked about this, and we just jumped on to one topic to another, and he suggested me that, okay, I have this group and we just talk about systems thinking, and if you are interested, you can join in anytime. I said, okay, just I'm free this weekend, so I will join in for sure.
So also, I'm curious, what were you potentially thinking that systems engineering could apply to in your life? Was there a particular area of responsibility or opportunity or practice?
I think opportunity is a byproduct of your daily experiences and your practices. When you have something serious enough, like things only, like all these products, what people see that, okay, if I learn this, I might get this opportunity. That is actually a byproduct of what you have practiced, and have you ever applied that thing in your life as well. So one of my takeaway from systems.
You went mute.
Did we lose?
Yeah.
The last word
you
we
hear me?
heard was systems.
Yeah, we lost the last part of your sentence.
So it's just that how you systematically dissect the whole process in sizable chunks, that you can understand the whole picture, that how to make this thing possible by just I would say dividing things into steps or into sizable chunks that you can have. So I think, if I learn to apply that in my real life as well, and in my everyday life as well, that would be awesome, because sometimes you lack the intellect to actually how to eat the full plate with the bite-sized chunks. I mean, and you try to swallow all of it at once, and then you choke. So yeah, I'm just, I just try to learn new things as well. And this thing was interesting enough to, have my attention. So I'm all excited to learn about it more.
So
Excited
thanks
to
for-
learn.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say, echoing excited to learn the role of
Yeah.
emotions in learning.
Yeah.
That's a branch of psychology that I don't think is taught yet in at least
Okay.
Psych 101. I'm not sure what it's taught at the graduate level, the role of emotions in learning.
It appears
And
to
it
be
was
taught
your birthday.
piecemeal.
If I'm not wrong, it was your birthday yesterday, Sam.
I lost the antecedent to the pronoun it.
Yeah, sorry, I was speaking, so I lost what you were saying. Did you?
Yeah, I said it was your birthday yesterday, if I'm not wrong.
Oh, it was your birthday yesterday. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was Sam's birthday
Yeah.
yesterday, and
My
yeah.
birthday was
Mhm.
many, many years ago. Okay.
the day of your birth was, but
Day of
the
your birth.
anniversary of the day of your birth was yesterday.
So yeah, happy belated birthday,
Yeah, but thanks for mentioning it.
or the day of the birthday.
Oh, and it was also Stacia Scoggins' birthday. You have the same birthday as your neighbor.
That's right. She only lives about 1 mile from me or so.
Yeah,
And she's also come here, just for reference.
once or twice. Yeah.
And then, by the way, I have one of my brother's daughters, Kira, also shares a birthday with me.
The autumn equinox, the birthday of the autumn equinox. Plus or
And
minus
one
a
of
day.
the adopters of one of my puppies, Jackie, also shares a birthday with me.
And didn't you say that your puppies themselves are having a birthday today?
They had a birthday. They have a birthday party today. In fact, I got to get off here and then have a Zoom with my parents, and then I'm taking the puppies to their birthday party so they can meet others of their litter as they've scattered around the Pacific Northwest. So we do this twice a year because I've had 3 litters. 2 of them were in late spring. One of them was in late September. So we have 2 birthday parties every year. So it's kind of a fun thing to do, to get the puppies together. They turned 3.
Oh, they're
The
young.
actual birthday was on the 22nd. It was 2 days ago.
Yeah.
3 days ago.
Did they recognize their siblings?
They always do. Yeah, they're always very happy. And they always recognize me and Gail and Veronica, we who raised them from puppyhood
Mhm.
all the way to adoption. Dogs are good. We humans should aspire to be as good and warm-hearted as puppies.
Yeah, well, dogs can be quite saintly.
Yeah, we misspelled them. We reversed the spelling of dog.
All right.
So just to mention, next week, I'm likely to launch into this big publication that I posted this past week, but I think it's too big to bring up today. So
200 pages.
yeah, but it's really rich. So I do think there's a lot there for us to talk about. But I think as far as, my questioning for today, I think I'll lean back and see what you guys want to do. I will listen mostly for now
Yeah.
on.
Well, we haven't had a check-in from Kayla or Joshua yet.
Sorry that the dogs were barking. Hi, I did my, there they go again. I did my check-in yesterday, so I'm just here listening. Plus I had a long night last night, but it was very interesting listening to you and Sam talk. And okay, bye. They're still barking.
Good to hear from you again, Kayla.
Thanks.
You're living the life, by the way. Travel, Disney, kids.
Universal Studios.
Exactly.
Last
Theme
night.
park. Okay. All right.
You gotta live, right? I'm having the time of my life, let me tell you.
Yep. There you go. An exemplary life.
Yeah, I work hard and I play hard. And who says you can't play hard as a single mom,
Nobody
It's
says
a lot of fun. I'm not a miserable woman. I'm having a great time.
Okay, we need details.
I did want to say, and I really don't want to stray off topic, but you and Barry know what kind of content I watch and listen to sometimes, especially when it comes to the patriarchy, and these weird things about high value women and some strange stuff. Anyway, my sister, finally, she told me that her husband, my brother-in-law, was listening to some of that crap, and she thought it was a joke. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not a joke. There's like websites and podcasts of just terrible guys talking about, for example, me as a single mom is like a low value woman, especially an independent woman. Oh gosh, dear God, I'm a low value woman. So my sister was like, that's really true. All of that's true. I was sharing some key phrases and stuff with her, like the red pill society. All of it's disgusting. Anyhow, it's a real eye opening. And she said it's very offensive, and it's starting to decay their marriage. And it's because she's the breadwinner, and her husband is saying all this crap about women in general. So she's having a hard time, and she was just saying, like, I can't believe he's watching this. He's never watched this before. And, all of a sudden, all this crap about high value women and low value women. Why are you even rating women in general? So this week was really interesting talking to my sister about that. I try to stay out of their marital problems, but, I had to be truthful with her and warn her, you are talking to a low value woman. So, poor thing, she does not like to educate herself on things like that. She's non-confrontational. She likes to keep the peace, but that's what little sisters are for. Anyways, that's in addition to my wonderful check-in yesterday.
So you may have just answered the question that I was about to ask, which is, in much of what the red hats, the Trumpers, the right wing, the
Red pill.
patriarchy believes in is so anti-woman that I myself have trouble understanding why women stay by those men and what they think of those men, especially as they have daughters with those men. What is going through their minds? Is it security? Is it that they actually believe it? Is it that they're just physically restrained?
Well, it could be a number of things. For one, I have no problem cooking for a man, cleaning the house. I don't have any of those problems at all. If I'm in an equal partnership with the man, and he respects me and loves me, I will want to do those things for him. And some of these women do. And perhaps they are like my sister, where they're clueless about some of these strange patriarchal movements going on. and then some people, yeah, maybe they are restrained by it. Maybe that's just all they know. But I don't know. Fuck that. I don't hang out with anybody who puts up with that shit. And if I do, I don't know, we don't talk about it because sure nobody wants to hear my side of it. But yeah, I've absolutely no idea. Maybe they really genuinely love their man, and maybe they believe the same thing as well.
So, look, my education is not nearly as good as some others, in particular, not nearly as good as Barry. But Barry, could you remind me, wasn't there a Greek play, was it Electra, about a group of women in a village who didn't like what the men were doing? So they basically said, hey, you guys just go over there. We're not going to be with you, quote unquote, until this thing gets corrected and rectified. And I think that's a way for women to have influence, which was clearly characterized in an ancient play. But I'm actually surprised it doesn't have more current application today.
The modern version is Stepford Wives. Do you remember the movie Stepford Wives?
That was where women were supposed to be perfect, right? In this model.
Well, they were robot, weren't they robots,
Perfect.
Kayla?
In this model.
Yeah, well, they were like programmed. They weren't robots, but the founder of the whatever programmed them. So once they got out of their program, that was the best part. We're like, what? We're brainwashed? We got programmed? And then they started bitching out their men.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if they were programmed or doppelgangers. You're saying they were biologically the same spouses, but they had been programmed. Is that what it was? And then
they've been programmed.
To be okay, yeah, that's closer to what Sam was suggesting, that the women were groomed to be the perfect housewife and then rebelled.
Oh well, at the end, like they lost their programming and then.
Yeah, they shed their programming. Yeah.
Yeah, that was funny.
I mean, it was probably 25 years ago that I saw that movie. I don't really remember the details all that much.
There's been a couple versions of it made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But no, I'm really asking. When a woman hears the guy say, "Oh yeah, women, we can grab them by the pussy anytime we want to," what is a woman thinking, especially if she has a daughter? And these guys are dating young men that follow this idiot. Now I'm going to be opinionated here, okay?
Well, you also have to understand that we've had to put up with that for a long time. I mean, it's almost to the point where it's kind of like, oh yeah, they're just joking. Ugh.
Yeah.
That's a way of
my first thought is like, ooh.
That value.
Yes.
If you just dismiss it and say, oh, they're just joking, that's just allowing it, of course, to continue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just boy talk, locker room talk. And then the 2 nights later, Melania wears this very unusual fashion gown with this gigantic bow called a pussy bow in the fashion literature. And nobody would have figured that out except that the fashionistas pointed out the name of this gigantic bow that Melania wore the night of the debate with Hillary.
So you talk about your sister who doesn't want to be confrontational. If she were to learn what these patriarchal practices and thoughts were doing to women's rights, would she care? And if she does, then wouldn't she want to make change? Or does she think that, oh, well, women should be subjugated, men should be in charge? Because if women don't learn and don't take action, essentially, and I hate to say this and it appears controversial, but they're enabling and they're empowering the current system.
Oh, absolutely. My sister actually does care, and I'm sure most women do. But it like marriage is it has a lot, I see marriage has a lot of weight in this. A lot of women don't want to be single. I mean, I kind of don't want to be single. Kind of. I love my life. But, a lot of people don't want to be alone, and it's just kind of what they fear, and they would rather put up with it and work with it because that's what we're asked to do when we're married. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what man would want to be open to that? And how much would a woman be willing to sacrifice, and how courageous could she be? You have to just ask all of these questions. One may say that I am not courageous because I will not put up with it, and therefore I will not date. Like, I would rather not date. I'm waiting for the time in my heart where I feel like, it would be nice to have a male companion, or I'm waiting for something to happen naturally. But I refuse to date because I see so much of it that I would rather not step into the forum and fight with someone. And it's part of my experiences as well. I mean, I was an attractive woman, and I did this dance that is very sensual. But I am not meek and quiet and any of those things. So I had a lot of failed relationships because of that. And it's kind of stung to this day, just worrying that I'm going to come across some guy that will do the same thing, try to stuff that out, have expectations, so I would just rather let love be organic at this point. But how many women are willing to do that?
And at some point, I'd like to deep dive into this topic here on a Sunday.
Love is one of those words that's is not a rigid designator. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Kayla. Go ahead.
Oh no, I always feel like it's kind of a downer. And I see that Deej muted himself. He's probably like, oh no. And I would love to bring another woman into the mix. Maybe another woman would be able to say it in a different way.
You could, I think Gail's like itching to bring up this topic.
Did you say itching or inching?
Itching.
Itching.
Yeah.
Oh,
she's afraid of how much she will say if this ever comes up and she's participating.
My friend Anne Marie actually wrote I think it was a master's thesis entitled "Love as a Pastiche," but it was basically trying to do an analysis of the elements of love.
I would love to see love being portrayed in a mathematical equation. Thank you and Sam talked about that once.
That would be an awesome topic.
There's a book by, I think was it M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book giving the 4 varieties of love: the biological love, the codependency love, what's the name?
Erotic love and agape love.
Agape, but there's a third one who's obscure name.
Filial.
No.
Family.
It's getting an emotional satisfaction out of it. It's sort of like nurturing. It's sort of a nurturing love, but that's not the word he used. I'm forgetting the word he used. It was a Latin term, but he basically had 4 varieties or phases, and if you can get to agape, which is deep and abiding respect, then you've won. But the first 3 have a limited duration and they fade. Cathexis cathexis was the third kind that he had in his book. So you had erotic love, codependency love, cathexis, and agape. That was his model. And it's not the only model, but that was the one that was in his book.
How can we make math sexy? How could we make science sexy?
Understand that it's the language of relationships.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is.
That's true.
Yeah, it's the nature of the bond, because each of those, there is a bond, but just like molecular bonds, there's different kinds of bonds that form in human relationships, and you can call those bonds love as a generic term, but there's these distinct kinds of bonds. Some bonds are easier to break. Some bonds are fragile and breakable. The bond of trust, for example, is easily broken and hard to mend. But familial love, that is love of your siblings or your parents or grandparents or children, those are much stronger and they'll withstand a lot more buffeting. So common interest, codependency, which is, you support me and I'll cook and make a home for you. That's a kind of a cathectic love. I'm sorry, that's more like a codependency love. But deep and abiding respect, I think that, that's sort of the apex, at least in the Scott Peck's analysis of love.
So let's put that on the agenda. I think that big tome and love in mathematical terms is definitely overdue, because it's too often viewed as a topic not addressable by science and mathematics, which I think is a misunderstanding of science and mathematics.
Yeah, it's just difficult. And it's difficult to do. The thing is, you can't do experiments to test your hypotheses. You have to rely on accidental observations and not intentional experiments.
It depends on who you are and how you do it.
Although to some extent, dramaturgy is a kind of an experiment, because you make up a synthetic drama that is like a romantic movie or something, romantic comedy, and then you see whether the audience reacts to it as realistic or improbable. So it's kind of a simulacrum.
Since we're bouncing around from topic to topic, can I touch on a small one?
Yeah, change the subject.
I shared a post 6 days ago, and I thought this was kind of interesting and possibly even useful. And it's the one about facts. A fact is information minus emotion.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing that.
An opinion is information plus experience. Ignorance is opinion lacking information. And stupidity is an opinion that ignores fact. I thought that was useful to at least bring up here and possibly either adopt or refine.
Yeah, that was interesting. I don't recall simulating any further thought about it, but I don't think I found anything unrealistic about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's particularly off. I think it's a potentially useful characterization when other situations come up. We can actually use this.
The real challenge comes in exposing the lesser of those. So exposing stupidity or ill-conceived opinions, that's where you get into interpersonal conflict and drama and stress or whatever you want to call it.
So let me refine that a little bit, Barry. I think exposing it is not that difficult. What you
it's easy to
about
expose it. It's just dangerous.
What you do about it and whether you continue to engage with stupid people, that's what I think you're referring to.
Yeah, it turns out it can be a colossal waste of time and a source of emotional distress to attempt to overthrow stupidity.
Right. So I'll say that that's probably true in a one-on-one situation. As a systems thinker, however, we must address stupidity. Okay.
Yeah,
This system is rife with it.
Right.
And if we let it spread, we are now in the middle of our mass extinction.
Yeah.
And if we care, we got to do something about it.
Yeah. And the question is,
which leads to this other quote. Let me say it and then I'll let you finish. Okay. those people who think they know everything are a great annoyance to those of us who do. Okay,
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov.
Yeah, I remember that
Okay.
one. Bit arrogant, but okay. I can live with that. He was
Yeah, but
pretty smart.
you get the point, right?
Yeah, I do get the point. Yeah. But as you know, I've got a little side hobby of, which is common in science, overthrowing misconceptions. And there's some misconceptions which are very dangerous to attempt to overthrow, because they are foundational beliefs that our culture is built upon. And so they will be very upsetting to overthrow them. And yet we know from the history of science that you've got to overthrow these misconceptions, because eventually they'll bite you in the tuchus if you don't overthrow them. But it's dangerous to be the spirit carrier in overthrowing a longstanding misconception. As you learn from Socrates or Galileo, or you probably can think of, maybe Freud or Darwin, the people who sort of pioneer these overthrows, they take a lot of flack. And they know, or, Gandhi or Martin Luther King. Go ahead, Sam.
I want to add another one in there as a potential topic, and that's going to be very dangerous to bring up. The right to your own religion.
Or philosophy, because people can have their personal philosophy.
Philosophy is fine. Religion is the problem.
Yeah, they're hard to distinguish, though. They're overlapping.
No, they're not.
They're not? I consider them overlapping.
So that's a potential good topic as well. So we got at least 3 out of this conversation.
Right to your own belief system. Yeah. Or value systems in addition to belief systems, there's value systems. Because you ought to have a right to your own values, but if your values are disvalued by everybody else, good luck to you, Mr. Trump. You're muted, Sam.
So I don't care what happens inside anyone else's cranium, but if that translates into behavior that negatively affects others, we got to talk about that.
Yeah. And negatively affects means throws other people into self-doubt. Because if you're going to overthrow a misconception, you're going to create doubt in the minds of people who have believed something since childhood, and then they begin to wonder, whether their beliefs are sane or not. And that is a problematic state. Throwing somebody into cognitive dissonance, pointing out that they're juggling notions which are mutually inconsistent or mutually incompatible, and revealing this phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, that will throw somebody literally into cognitive dissonance, and they begin to doubt themselves. Like, how come I believe 2 things which can't both be true or can't both be compatible?
That should be a natural condition. That should be recognized as just living.
It is.
If you're uncomfortable with that, then you're uncomfortable with learning.
Or resolving these competing belief systems. We have a lot of competing belief systems. I mean, look at Trump. I mean, every other day, or even the second half of the same paragraph, he contradicts himself. So it's not like it's an uncommon observation,
Well, either this guy is a master at manipulating people's thoughts, which I think he is.
Some people's thoughts.
Or he has just the tremendous
Hubris.
disrespect and disgust for truth, which I think is also true. Okay.
Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah.
So both can be wielded as weapons to either acquire or stay in power. And unfortunately, that's been true for thousands of years.
Yep. And it's the basis of a lot of drama. I've been binge watching Columbo, and every episode has the same basic script. That there's 2 versions of what happened, the villain's version and Columbo's version. They're mutually inconsistent, and they battle out, which version should you hold up as the accurate model of what happened.
So I would posit that science right now is one of our best tools for leveling up.
Yeah,
If
I
we
agree.
don't level up, we're going to go the way of other extinct civilizations.
And the challenge is that a lot of that leveling up requires some very precision thinking, including mathematical reasoning. And that's rare in our population. There aren't very many people who are competent at rigorous precision thinking. And I don't really know. I mean, short of a generation or 2 generations worth of education, I'm not sure how to overcome that.
So we got at least 3 good topics to put on the,
Yeah.
actually 4 on the backlog.
Well, yeah, it's good to have a set of agenda items. But yeah, I mean, in my role as a science educator, you run into learning disabilities or learning, so what's the right word, obstacles, and you can't, and you figure out, I just can't see to get enough people past these challenges to make any progress. And so we live under cultural models which are based on misconceptions, which are unsustainable. So we have all these unsustainable beliefs and practices, which will eventually lead us to going extinct if we don't correct them. And that seems much harder than one would have hoped or expected.
Is it correct to even be so generous as to think that the Republicans and right-wingers believe in social Darwinism? Whoever survives deserves to, and whoever doesn't deserves to die. Is that pretty much part of their platform?
That I don't know, but there's also the time horizon over which you calculate survival, because you can survive until you have a catastrophic collapse. But you're doing just fine until the apocalypse. And of course, theology is full of apocalyptic stories where everything's doing fine until suddenly there's this sudden revelation of doom and disaster. That's the so-called apocalyptic model. And people are looking at climate apocalypse or food shortage apocalypse or whatever, people don't come to appreciate the apocalypse until it's literally upon them, until it's happened.
Because they don't look at what's happening. They don't look
They-
at the trending.
They
look
don't
at-
have reliable model-based reasoning to project the future beyond a very short time horizon.
The classic example of that barrier is lily pads in a pond. You know that one?
Not by that name.
So if you're not aware that lily pads are, going to overgrow and they're multiplying at an astonishing rate, let's assume it's like, they're doubling every day. By the time you notice that it's covering half the pond, you're
Oh.
1 day away from disaster.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the exponential growth thing is that at some point, exponential growth has to come to an abrupt halt because you run out of some resource that's finite. And if you don't do the mathematical model, you don't anticipate the, hitting the brick wall or going off the cliff, whichever metaphor you prefer.
So this also applies to things like population growth, which was a big deal for 50, 60 years
Yeah,
ago.
boom and bust models in populations. These are your classical model in population
Right.
statistics is boom and bust.
And which, by the way, all that doom mongering is also non-systemic thinking, because it doesn't look at what happens with other factors, which either accelerate or impede growth.
Well, the Malthusian model that you can see that some resource is going to hit a brick wall, but you can't anticipate any kind of workarounds. So,
Because
so
we're
some
not
resource will hit a brick
working
wall, but then
as
what happens?
Systemic engineers. We're not working as systems engineers
Exactly.
or systems thinkers or systems
And we're a
modelers.
rare breed. Systems thinking is theologians were a rare breed, and philosophers are a rare breed. Systems thinkers, cybernetics, it's feedback control theory. It's all pretty arcane and specialized, and most people aren't any good at it.
Which is why democracy doesn't work.
Yeah, like I said, it's one thing to vote for a realistic goal, but it's another thing to try to legislate how to reach it. that's where we make the mistakes. If you say, okay, we're going to fund the James Webb Space Telescope, but we're not going to let the legislators plan it. We're going to hire subject matter experts who are going to spend 30 years figuring out how to achieve the goal. That's sensible. But trying to do medical decisions with Lindsey Graham running calling the shots, that's silly.
Or requiring that the moonshot or Mars shot has to be done in my 4-year administration.
Yeah. So yeah, democratic goals, what do we want to invest our dimes in, march of dimes, but let the scientists figure out how to use those dimes most effectively to achieve the goal in a realistic manner. That's not going to be a spectacular failure. Some of those early rocket shots were spectacular failures because they were in a rush.
Okay, here's another one. How is Putin going to bring 300,000 new recruits to his armies?
Well, by coercion, and he's going to fail, my prediction.
Yeah, and how well trained are they going to be?
They're going to be untrained. And here's the interesting, the next day, Zelensky says, any of you Russian conscripts who find yourselves in Ukraine, if you want to give yourselves up and become Ukrainian citizens, we'll welcome you with open arms and no consequences. I don't think Putin anticipated that.
It's also dangerous.
Well, I mean, it's a transition. Is that you go into a halfway house or something, and it's like anybody who comes to America to become a productive citizen as opposed to becoming a new mafia. You see their progression, and eventually you have a citizenship ceremony where they've earned their stripes. Those Venezuelans who came to the border, they were middle-class citizens. They were well-educated middle-class Venezuelans who had to get the hell out of Venezuela. But they're not wayward migrants. They're well-educated and have professional competence.
I saw at least one picture of a crowd protesting that new draft, or maybe I was mistaken.
Yeah, I've seen
at
the
least. I
pictures
think
too.
The populace is now voicing its opposition.
Yeah,
and I'm hoping that grows, although it's dangerous for them.
it's very dangerous, but people are leaving the country and crossing the border and trying to book flights, or all these. I mean, people can be very creative when it comes to opposing a single-minded dictator. You'll see a lot of creativity in addressing that. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, a lot of the Iraqi army, they shed their uniforms and melted away. It's easy to defend a piece of land if nobody's coming at you, but as soon as they're coming at you, if you vanish into thin air, that's been known to happen.
The last point, just for today, is this quote from Francis Bacon. A man prefers to believe what he prefers to be true.
Yep. Physics advances one funeral at a time. That's the Max Planck version of the same sentiment.
Well, I put that into 2 words. Death works.
Yeah. And like I say, a lot of cultural beliefs fall by the wayside one generation at a time. I'm sure there are things that, that I hold dear that will fall by the wayside, after my time on this planet. I'm going to try to stay at the frontier, but I'm sure I miss some things that are misconceptions, undiagnosed misconceptions. unrealistic expectations about, how to educate the public. Maybe some of the ideas that I have about education simply are going to be proven to be unworkable, and something else has to take its place. Very likely somebody will come along with a better idea and succeed where I spectacularly failed.
So let me link back to that last quote with another one from Susan B. Anthony. He says, I distrust those who know so well what God wants them to do, because I notice it always coincides with their own desires.
Yeah. Yeah, the Bible thumpers.
Yep.
Bible thumpers, yeah.
So one of the bigger missions, one of the reasons I set up this thing on Sundays, Barry, is finding nonsense in our sacred texts.
Oh, that's easy to do. But you can
Yeah,
also
but there's
find
a lot of it. There's a lot of it, Barry.
You can also find nonsense in our modern academic texts too.
Sure, but at least that's already got a method for rectification. There
Yeah,
isn't such a method for rectification in the sacred texts, quote unquote.
well, yeah, sure, because it's much easier to replace a poorly written history text with a better one. It's harder to replace a 3,000-year-old document with. I mean, they've tried. I mean, you had the New Testament that supposedly augmented or supplanted the Old Testament, and you have the Upanishads and I don't know, the Tao Te Ching and all these other
groups of
alternatives.
men deciding what others should believe.
Yeah, but that's what politicians
Men.
do also. Yeah, politicians tell you what they want the electorate to believe.
Yeah,
course,
but politicians will go away. Those religions seem to hang around much longer.
Yeah, but politics itself doesn't go away. Just the individual politicians. The whole thing about politics, which I have a relatively low opinion of. It's an antisocial drama, and how did I put it? In which ignorant people exchange threatening and confusing messages with each other, something like that. It's like my definition of the fundamental algorithm of the rule of law. First they shake you up, then they shake you down.
So I'm about to recede into the distance. It's close to 2 hours.
Yep.
And I think we have big topics underway for the next several sessions, but none would fit into the remaining time available.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, unless Joshua or Kaylor Digivijay want to pipe up before we close, I'm kind of out of topics for which there's a surviving audience.
Let me just toss another one in there. One of your favorite topics, one of mine also. The scientific or mathematical basis of ethics.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking just this morning about one of the exercises that I ginned up when I was doing online learning communities, and it was on ethics. And I set up a scenario. It was entitled, "When the moral majority meets the ethical minority." And the scenario is, the moral majority makes a rule, and the rule is the ethical minority must obey the rule of the moral majority. What happens next? And then you sort of argue what's going to happen next. That was one of my favorite little thought experiments.
It's just the latest might makes right practice.
Yeah, but the question is, what happens next? Envision how the drama unfolds in the wake of that setup.
Yeah.
And I find of all the sort of thought experiments, that's sort of one of my all-time favorites. We can actually do it sometime, although I think you need more than 3 people participating. When I did it, typically had half a dozen or a dozen participants, and actually I have the transcripts when those were done back in the 90s.
Okay, Barry, one more parting shot and then I will shut up. Okay.
Okay.
And this is my constant theme to you because I think I keep hearing an undertone, which I am concerned with. And this is from Noam Chomsky. Optimism is a strategy for making a better future. Because unless you believe that the future can be better, you're unlikely to step up and take responsibility for making it so. So there's no other approach to the future than optimism, in my opinion.
Well, I've been optimistic about education, but possibly overly optimistic that the results fell short of my optimistic expectations. But that doesn't mean I give up on education. I just think it's turning out to be harder than I first anticipated.
Because there are many factors at work, not just the
Well,
educators.
there are many obstacles that, I mean, the pandemic really threw a monkey wrench into just, conventional education. Public school education was totally thrown into a cocked hat from the pandemic. And those are the kinds of things where you try some other techniques that, like online learning, which I pioneered back in the 90s. But no matter what you do, even in online learning, I ran into obstacles that I didn't anticipate. We worked our way through them, we suffered our way through them, but there turn out to be obstacles that are not foreseen and have to be worked around in real time. And, with experience, you begin to expect these obstacles will appear unanticipated. And you will have to be more creative going forward than you thought that the good ideas you have are not bad ideas, they're just not sufficient. There's still more ideas that still have to be developed and worked out and implemented to get around the unforeseen obstacles.
Okay, so that's on the agenda.
Okay.
Now, this is my checkout. Barry, you have the helm.
All right. Well, I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to say. I'll pause and see if Kayla or Digi Vijay or Joshua want to turn on their mics and say something.
Thank you so much. I am cooking breakfast for my kids, so I'm gonna bow out as well.
Okay.
I'll see you guys next week.
Bon appetit.
Bis später.
I'll wait and see if either Joshua or Digi Vijay want to say anything before we close. And I will save the chat. I think I already did. And give them half a minute to. Here's Joshua, he unmuted.
I don't really have anything to say. I'm listening, and it's not like it's not a quadrilogue conversation. It was more of a dialogue. So just listening. So I don't want to start up another conversation at the end of a conversation. I'm sure you want to go, Barry. So I'm just listening.
Okay.
I'm sure I have a million things to say, but just listening.
Yeah, well, good. And if you think about them and wanted to pipe up a summary or afterthought, you can always do that.
No. I think you guys covered it. Yeah, good dialogue.
Okay, appreciate that. Digi Vijay, any closing words? I'll give him about half a minute or 40 seconds to see if he opens up the channel. Okay, I think that kind of times it out. So I'm going to stop the recording and end the session. Everybody have a good week.